Well, a very good evening to welcome to a brand new episode of Biz1st in Focus here on TV1. I'm your host this evening, Shahin Jurang-Pati, and the topic of discussion today on the program is exports. The Sri Lankan government has constantly reiterated that exports, that the government wants to initiate an export-driven economy. Now the question is, how is the export industry in Sri Lanka faring? And to talk about this, we are joined by the President of the National Chamber of Exporters, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe. Mr. Jasinghe, thank you very much for joining us on the program this evening.
My pleasure.
Mr. Jasinghe, like I said before, that the Sri Lankan government at various business forums and economic forums have reiterated over and over again that they are looking at an export-driven economy. You, as a president of the National Chamber of Exporters, how would you suggest the export industry is faring at the moment?
All right, we have been faring quite well month over month, and if you read the statistics of 2017, we had significant growth, and the trend has been good for this year so far. Just that as a contribution to the economy, our import bill has been outstripping the exports, and that has an impact on what you see right now on the dollar fluctuations. And I think despite all the a lot of work is being done to improve exports, but we need to improve the export productivity. In other words, expand our exports.
Mr. Jasinghe, the government aims to generate $20 billion in exports by 2020. How do you think the government will be able to achieve this target by 2020?
Yes, I think right now we are at a level of 12 to 13 billion. 2017 was almost 12 billion. So we are on the correct track. The GSP plus being given back to us has definitely helped, particularly in the seafood, in the fisheries and the garment. And also the US GSP, which was out at the beginning of the year, has been reinstated. So that holds a lot of promise to us. So I think the infrastructure or the wherewithal to do that is in place, just that we need to battle the situation with regard to non-tariff barriers, particularly in the advent of these free trade agreements, which we are working very closely with the stakeholders, and to protect our industries and our export markets, because we can foresee there will be we don't want to have a one-way traffic situation, and at the same time we want to protect our exporters and local manufacturers.
Mr. Jasinghe, various economists have suggested that Sri Lanka is still sticking to its traditional exports, and we should diversify our exports. What do they mean by diversifying our exports?
All right, we have been mainly a commodities exporter. So if you take the past, we have been tea, coconut and rubber, and as you can see, the entire export mix has changed, and there is actually an export mix which the Ministry for Planning and Implementation has, and that export mix has been developing. So we have right now the mix is where bulk of it is in apparel, and then you have tea, and then the other services and miscellaneous. So we need to grow the miscellaneous export part of the mix, which now stands at around 2% roughly. So that is where the export growth would come from. It's the non-traditional exports. I wonder whether you would know that there is in our local diamond industry is actually cutting diamonds for high-tech machinery. So we have a lot of unsung exporters. Then we have the ICT, which is now making great strides, and we look forward to them being a very significant member of the exporter community. And already you can see companies like Iron One, Open Arc, and such actually making strides in the global cyberspace. Now, for something like ICT, it is really your intellect, and we have got pledges from the Honorable Prime Minister that if you can develop an infrastructure, that the government would help in training. So there are some very positive vibes, if you can call it, for the government to actually that they would assist us. So it is the growth of the non-traditional or the exporters that you don't hear too much about, who would come into the stream. So as the President of the National Chamber of Exporters, our aim is to develop an export entrepreneur environment and to create the ecosystem so that it will be conducive for, say, if you have something on eBay, and if you can sell your stuff on eBay on a very, very small scale, you are an exporter.
Absolutely.
So I think we are looking even at that level of micro export. So the entrepreneurship, and I think recently the Minister of Finance spoke about an enterprise Sri Lanka. So I think this is all part of a larger value chain.
Mr. Jasinghe, you spoke about apparel exports in Sri Lanka, which I suppose falls under one of the traditional exports in Sri Lanka: apparel, tea, coconut, so on and so forth. But recently I spoke to an economist in a private conversation, and he suggested that the apparel industry is touch and go at the moment, and that now importers of apparel products are moving towards Vietnam, Bangladesh, where labor is much cheaper. Is there any basis to this?
Actually, labor, you brought up a very good touch on labor. Sri Lankan labor is not cheap, and also Sri Lankan labor is very hard to come by. Right now the chamber is working with its stakeholders to tackle the skills development situation, where today young people have so many options. So what we need to do to maintain the momentum is probably going to automation and new practices, be it agriculture, be it the garment industry. We are, like it or not, getting into the robotics or into automation. So for us to maintain the scale, because to maintain a sustainable export economy, we need to have scale and skill. So right now we are a bit short on the scale and skill, and efforts have to be drawn towards developing scale and skill. Now, talking of apparel, the National Export Strategy, which will be launched on the 19th of July, has recognized the apparel industry as a mature industry. So it is not part of the National Export Strategy. Instead, they have identified 6 other emerging markets or emerging industries that would actually take us to the next level in terms of exports.
Could you briefly describe what this the National Export Strategy is about?
Well, for the longest time, the entire business community, and particularly the private sector, has been clamoring for consistency in terms of policy, and also to following that a strategy, and a strategy that would be sustainable irrespective of what the political climate would be. So the MODSIT, the ministry, took this on hand, and with the ITC, International Trade Center, they came upon a lengthy process of engaging the stakeholders and the private sector, because we on both sides, the private sector and the state sector, recognize that for a strategy to work, there has to be a perfect private-public partnership. So the National Export Strategy is a result of this PPP. Now, why a PPP should be there? Because if it is to work, and if it's to be carried on, because it can't be a strategy that's imposed in 1 or 2 or 5 years. It has to be for the longer time, at least 6 years in the minimum. You need a perfect private-public partnership. So we have the state policy, or we have the strategy, and now it's up to the private sector to create the mechanism to take it through.
So will this strategy in any way help out SMEs, small and medium-scale entrepreneurs?
Definitely, because the entire nature of the NES is identifying, say for example, food processing. Now food processing could be a housewife, for example, who's good at making chutneys, and she could actually get into the export with the correct wherewithal and the correct support, get into the exporter community, and we have examples like that. So I think the NES focuses on that and has made emphasis. So just that we need the infrastructure and the mechanism to get such entrepreneurs into the mainstream.
Well, Mr. Jasinghe, we are going for a short commercial break. You're watching Biz1st in Focus, and we are in discussion with the President of the National Chamber of Exporters, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Biz1st in Focus. We are in discussion with the President of the National Chamber of Exporters, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe, on the current situation in terms of exports in Sri Lanka. Is it faring well or otherwise? Mr. Jasinghe, during the break I was talking to you about the current situation about the exports, obviously, and we were talking about the depreciation of the rupee. Now, over the past couple of days, the rupee has hit an all-time low. How is this impacting the export industry at the moment?
On the face of it, anybody would say that exporters should be laughing all the way to the bank because you get more rupees for a dollar.
Absolutely.
But that is just one link in the value chain. because in some cases we go up to even 95% of value addition, particularly the value added exports would suffer as a result because the inputs are imported. So then you come to the question of how competitive would you be, or would your product or service be when you have a situation like what we are going through right now on the depreciating rupee. So it is not all smiles. We have to face the reality and probably look at some inward thinking. So one of the suggestions has been, where some of these imported inputs, whether we can do through research and development, try to substitute that so that we can have more local products meeting international standards to do value addition and benefit.
Mr. Jasinghe, would it help if to generate more exports if you would control some of the imports, like the basic commodities like agricultural products in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, but then again, you are going back in time, right? Because okay, probably you have, it's not control, but probably you have some sort of regulation, and also regulation in very short-sighted regulation could have long-term impacts. For example, you look at the glyphosate controversy, where in any scientific field there is a protocol that has to be followed, and protocol takes time. So it's not an opinion or not a well-informed opinion, but it's a well-informed decision that has to be taken by the scientific community, which takes me to the next point, where in this export enterprise we need the engagement of our research institutions, particularly on research and development. The scientific community has to arise and look at innovation, because there may be some very good innovations out there that can really help the export drive, and if that happens successfully, then we can reap the full benefits of a depreciating rupee.
Mr. Jasinghe, now with the rupee depreciating and you saying that it is affecting to a certain extent to the export sector, so how will this contribute, or how will this help the government in achieving the $20 billion growth by 2020 in exports?
The only way out right now, as I say, it is volume. So you got to export more. So it's come to a situation where you either export or perish, because the imbalance of the import bill and the export generation is like, the imports are 50% higher than that of exports. So then for us to get out of this trap, we got to encourage exports, look at the regulation, ease regulation, and also support through R&D and various initiatives through the state, and also the NES have consistent policy, so that we can actually have more and more business of the business community getting into the export drive.
When you mean export more, what more can we export apart from the traditional export products we have?
It is diversity. We have to diversify our exports. We have a lot of scope in terms of service. Now, one of the industries that the NES has identified is medical tourism. Then tourism is there, boat building. Now these are all virtually new areas that we have had the experience with, but we have not done enough. So there is a lot of scope and hope if we actually develop them. So that's what I mean by exporting more. Now these are previously unexploited or uncharted territory. When you say uncharted, not really accurate, but we have an industry, we have a boat building industry, but then we have to have the correct testing facilities, the correct infrastructure, so that we can compete with countries like Taiwan or Korea even, that do leisure craft and other boat building. So we need, the NES is only a start, only a starting point. But as I said earlier, you need the mechanisms to reap the full benefits of such a strategy.
Mr. Jasinghe, now previously during the interview you spoke about, for example, a young teen or anyone for that matter selling something off eBay and he automatically becoming an exporter, which you called a micro-segmentation of exporters. So do you think that this is an avenue that Sri Lanka should be focusing more?
Actually, the wherewithal is there. You have Ikman.com, you have various websites that you can actually, that's your marketplace, and you have the global reach, and that is a start, because if you have at least the idea of exports inculcated from a very young age, you become a businessman and entrepreneur, and then you would realize that you would earn more on your earning dollars rather than earning rupees, and probably have a larger market. Because what ICT has done, they made your trading partners more numerous, and probably it only stretches up to your imagination. That's the only limit. So if a young guy can, think very, very far, and there's a lot of hope in our millennials, and I think if they get into the stream, you might find a completely different complexion to our export landscape.
Then I suppose this is also a good opportunity for Sri Lanka, for the young generation coming forward, to move out of the, common or socially
seeker jobs sort
exactly,
of thing,
lawyers, doctors, businessmen, bankers, so on and so forth. And this is a good avenue to reach out as well, isn't it, Mr.?
Actually, we have a program at the NCE on potential exporters, and also anyone who wishes to export, we link them up with now, for example, we have a very good program linking up the cultivators in the north and east through the International Labour Organization, or the ILO. We link them up with vegetable exporters, so that you get the fresh produce that is linked up and it is competitive. Now there is a huge demand for papaya. So we have the red lady papaya that is exported. Then I think there are some cultivations on Cavendish bananas. Now these are all most of them are war widows, or people have lost everything during the war, and we are linked up. So of course those people being quite industrious, they are working hard, and we have these linkages. So our aim is to link the producer in the north, east and south, and the east, west, southwest, south and north, so that we bring them into the export hub and introduce them to people. Now there are experienced exporters who have already established their markets abroad, where it would be a bit challenging for a cultivator to go directly and export. But if we give the avenues, so we call them potential exporters. Another area that is untapped is on the Hikkadwa beach or in Galle. You find the very active handicrafts industry, but we've not exploited that, or we've not gone into it. Whereas if you see a tourist walking down Hikkadwa, on the street of Hikkadwa, you probably have at least a wraparound. Now that they have to come here to buy it. But if we have the avenues, so that is where the entrepreneurship part of the export value chain needs to be developed. So there the handicrafts ministry or the has a large role to play. So we need, as time goes on, to engage them into how they connect the producer with the exporter, and the chamber has the wherewithal to do that. At least we have the infrastructure in place. So now we need the leads.
Well, Mr. Jasinghe, we are going for a short commercial break. You're watching Biz1st in Focus, and we are in discussion with the President of the National Chamber of Exporters, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to Biz1st in Focus here on TV1. I'm Shahin Rampati, and we're talking to the President of the National Chamber of Exporters, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe. We're talking about the current situation in the export industry in Sri Lanka. Mr. Ramal Jasinghe, we were talking about involving the youth, the millennials, into the export industry, say how we can use internet web-based platforms for export industries. Do you think this is a good opportunity for Sri Lanka as well to reach out to the non-traditional countries that we export to now? Right now we export primarily to the Middle East, to China, I suppose, US and UK. Do you think we can reach out to more of the European countries through these web-based exporting platforms?
Actually, it's going to be a necessity rather than something that you can option, because if you don't do that, we would not be able to expand or get the export targets that we are planning to achieve. But it goes back to a very basic principle. Now, if you were to have an enterprise, you would have a marketing plan, and then from that you would probably do your market research and look at it at least in a semi-scientific way to see how you can explore these markets, explore new areas, new markets, new market opportunities. Right now, as it stands, an exporter gets a contact and he just sells. He has not done any research into that market, and that's where the first batch goes in. Then the second and third, they fail. So the EDB once again has worked on a branding exercise. Now for this we brought the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing, the University of Kelani and the University of Jawaharlal to come up with a platform or template on which you could actually brand Sri Lanka. So then that makes the micro entrepreneur, export entrepreneur's proposition a little more easier to go into new markets. Now if you take, for example, if you watch any TV program, particularly cable TV, you find in India they even advertise in the cities, Madras, Chennai, Mumbai, things like that. So we haven't still come to that stage. So we are actually far behind, where we need to advertise globally the promise of Sri Lanka, and that would be the conduit for our micro entrepreneurs or millennials to take particularly exports like our ideas and services, ICT, BPOs, things like that, and even say selling platform like eBay, like Alibaba. There could be an Alibaba entrepreneur somewhere lying somewhere here, somewhere in a school, or maybe somebody who just graduated. So we need the mechanism, we need to bring the ecosystem to attract them.
Do you think that, you mentioned a pretty important word that I think is important, at least in your answer there, market research. Do you think the government right now is doing enough research to tap into those untapped export areas around the world?
Well, that we have our embassies, and in our embassies worldwide we have the trade attaché or the trade minister. So their role needs to be expanded. I think quite a while ago, some time back, Minister Harsha De Silva spoke about a concept of commercial diplomacy. Now they are not talking about it much these days, but I think commercial diplomacy is one of the precursors to market research. So I won't expect our embassies to do market research, but at least we could be shown the way, at least pave the way, so that okay, there is a market, say in some unheard of place, like where we have a mission, and then we might probably be able to see whether doing a market research in a place like that, in a location like that, is worthwhile. So at least if we try to export there, we are going with our eyes open. So I think the concept of commercial diplomacy needs to be revived and strengthened, and that could supplement the national export strategy.
Mr. Jasinghe, now you said that the Chamber, the National Chamber of Exporters, has created a platform, and you all are including the younger generation to this whole export-based economy in Sri Lanka and how we can improve on it. Do you think the government should also focus on something like this and give priority to the youth and encourage them, saying, yes, your plan is good, so this is what we want to do with you? Exploit the youth skills.
All right, this is one initiative that I need to emphasize on, is training. Now, there is nowhere that you find a course that trains you on export. You'll either find a marketing course, an economics course, something very, very general. Now, the National Chamber of Exporters has its training arm, which has TVEC recognition, the National Institute of Exporters or Exports, where we develop youth, young people, school leavers, and those working in the export industries to train themselves through a certificate course, diploma, and a higher diploma. And then as that progresses, we are looking at any young person who will want to aspire to high academic achievements, link up with universities or institutions where you could lead up even to an MBA, so that they are nurtured in the field of exports. So this is a start. So we started the courses about 3 years ago on the National Institute of Exporters, and we have churned out 3 batches so far. So it's a start, but I'm sure that once the NIOE takes root, this would be a worthwhile, at least an attraction. Because picture yourself, I mean, you leave school, you're looking to do something, and at least if there's a path that you could get the knowledge or the know-how to do something at home and probably get into a trade that is lucrative, that would be a very good start.
Because Mr. Jasinghe, social media is clearly the way forward.
Definitely.
An online platform is the way forward. you don't essentially have to get on eBay, Alibaba or anything to purchase goods. You can purchase goods as easy as Facebook or Instagram right now.
Definitely.
So it is important that our government as well gets their head wrapped around this whole technological advancement that the world is going on. But let's shift gears for a second. Since this issue, the current issue has been a hot topic for the past week or so, New York Times not too long ago made an expose about the
politics,
the Hambantota port and the Colombo port. But my question to you is not about the political factor behind that. Since the Hambantota port could be deemed as a somewhat failed project at the moment, how do you think this has affected the investor confidence in Sri Lanka?
Well, for better or worse, a decision has been made, the project has come up, you got a port. So what do? You make the best of a bad situation or you turn around. I mean, me being a professional marketer, these are opportunities that marketers look for, where you make the best of a situation that probably been mismanaged or turned bad. Now I think, looking at it very, very objectively, you have a strategic location in Hambantota. Just that our logistics, we are still very Colombo based in terms of our commercial activity. But there, and if you were to develop that area, I mean, you could shift part. I don't know how practical it is right now, but it would eventually happen because you've got, I mean, you're not going to close down the port because it's in Hambantota, but you've got to make the best of it. You've got an airport. So I think these are building blocks for opportunity, and also bring up, because at the end of the day you got the provinces in the Hambantota district and the provinces around where you could develop various industries including agriculture, and then create a commercial hub there. So it's a matter of making the best of a situation. Now I am not sure of the other political and military ramifications and with the Chinese involvement, but again we have to remember that Sri Lanka is a sovereign state, that we still rule the destinies of the projects. So we have to have very sensible policy making, very far-reaching decision making, and involve the private sector in managing the fate of the Hambantota project.
Well, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe, we have to wrap up, unfortunately. That was the president of the National Chamber of Exporters, Mr. Ramal Jasinghe. A very important point which Mr. Jasinghe said to wrap up. Yes, the Hambantota port may be leased by the Chinese, so on and so forth. And regardless of the whole political situation, Sri Lanka is a sovereign nation, and Sri Lanka rules its own destinies for its projects. This has been Biz1st in Focus. I'm Shahin Jarampati. Good night.